Hello and welcome back to another episode of Creedle. Today I'm joined by my good friend Andrew Petiprin, who's joining us once again for the first time in a while, but familiar listeners will well know Andrew's voice and his visage as he appears on YouTube here. So Andrew, welcome back to Creedle. Pleasure to have you.
Good to see you, Zach. It's been a while. Glad to be conversing for your audience again.
Absolutely. I think the last time we did one of these, it was one of our What a Week episodes, which we used to do pretty much every week and then had to pull back that ops tempo just due to the busyness of our respective lives. So we brought one of those back, but today we have something different. We're not doing the What a Week, although we are going to be talking about an article in depth. We'll call that our close read section, I guess, if we'll do that. But it's an article you wrote on AI. We're also going to talk about your book, and it's not really a new book. You wrote it a while ago. I think it came out over a year ago now, right? A year and a half, maybe?
No, it came out in December. So yeah, not quite a year, but
I've just been in this vortex, I guess. It feels like a lot longer ago to me than that, but okay, great.
Actually, reviews are still kind of just trickling out for the book. And our mutual friend, Casey Chalk, just wrote one for Catholic World Report, a nice
that's right.
complimentary review.
I saw that. Well, it's a great book. I have not read it cover to cover because it's not really designed to be read cover to cover. Right. You can do it. It's written in such a way that for those who have not seen the films on the Vatican film list, there's a nice little synopsis of the film in each review / commentary in there. So you certainly can read it cover to cover. I think the better way to do this, as my wife and I are doing, is you watch through the Vatican film list. And this is a project, there are 45 films, so it can take you a while to do this, but you watch through the film and then you read the commentary. There are two other co-authors in this book. It's published by Word on Fire. I'll drop a link in the show notes to anyone who wants to buy a copy for themselves, but we'll talk about it. It looks like this. Pretty fun book cover there. It's sort of imitating a movie theater marquee. There's your copy. Great. Mm-hmm. Your co-authors, David Paul Baird, who I think was the original conceiver of the idea for doing this book, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And then Michael Ward, who I think is based in Oxford still, right?
He is, yeah. He's a priest of the Personal Ordinariate of Our Lady of Walsingham. He's a former Anglican cleric, and he is arguably the world's greatest expert on C.S. Lewis. So he's a terrific guy, terrific scholar, and cinephile. So yeah, he and David Baird are friends, and I had known Father Michael a little bit as well. And it was David's kind of idea originally, and then I just got involved with the two of them, and the three of us kind of divided up the chapters. David did the most, and then Michael and I did 11 each. So it's basically David wrote half the book, and Michael and I wrote a quarter of the book, and then we all collaborated on the introduction as well.
Nice. I may have told you this story before, but I first met Reverend Dr. Ward when I was at Oxford, and he was doing some work at Blackfriars. I don't know if he was a resident fellow at Blackfriars, which is the permanent private hall of the Dominicans in Oxford, not technically a college, as you know, Andrew. And I went to a lecture on Planet Narnia, which is one of his books, sort of exploring the cosmic themes in the Narnian world. And it was fascinating. It just, in it, he revealed so much to me that was going on under the surface of the Narnia texts. And I thought it was really, really cool. So yeah, if you want to learn more about Narnia from that perspective, you should check out his book, Planet Narnia. It's pretty good.
It's a great book. It's revolutionized our understanding of the Chronicles of Narnia. I mean, he uncovered something that Lewis put in the books that no one had ever noticed, that basically each book is based on one of the 7 planets of the kind of medieval zodiac. And it makes perfect sense. And Michael he's just so good at the way he describes all of that and stuff. So he's done other great stuff. He did a book, a kind of commentary on the abolition of man, which is, I think, such an important book for us to read in our times. And, he's just done a lot of other great stuff too. Can't speak.
Has he done one on the Space Trilogy? Because I'd love to read that. I just finished the Space Trilogy a few months ago, and it was very good. I am sure he's written about the Space Trilogy, but I don't think he's done like a full book on them yet. But I love the Space Trilogy too. I actually think the last book, That Hideous Strength, should be considered alongside 1984 and Brave New World as sort of one of the great kind of British dystopian mid-century novels. I certainly agree with that. However, I will also add that it is not my favorite of the trilogy. I actually like Perelandra. I think Perelandra is a better one.
Yeah. So the whole trilogy is great, but that third one, because it's set on Earth and it has this kind of government and conspiratorial, and it has all that kind of stuff kind of going on in it too. I recommend that one.
For my money, I mean, I'm not known as someone who's read the entire corpus of the great works of the 20th century, but I've tried to read a lot of them. I think Brave New World is the finest novel of the 20th century that I've read. So it's probably too bold of a claim for me to assert that it's the best novel of the 20th century, but it's my favorite 20th century novel.
It's a great one.
Yeah,
it's a great one. Yeah.
Well, let's dive into the Popcorn with the Pope, this amazing book where you dive into the Vatican film list. Maybe we can first talk about what the Vatican film list is. And while we do that, I will share my screen and just show my viewers what kinds of films are on there. I will mention that this came out, I think, in 1995, and there are 3 categories of it. So 45 films total, 3 categories altogether. And they are broken up along the themes of religion, values, and art. And I will add that in my brief experience watching my way through these films, the art section can be a bit tough to digest. So there's a lot of, it looks like I actually for some reason can't share my screen, unfortunately. So maybe we'll have to do that on another call. But the art section is a little bit tough to digest. My wife and I, for example, started watching 8½, which was probably not a great one to start with because it's very sort of like experimental cinema, a bit absurdist, and just very strange. So we ended up stopping that one and saying, basically, I don't think our sensibilities are quite attuned to appreciate this one yet. So maybe we'll come back to that one, but for now we'll watch something else.
Yeah, I think that's a good strategy. You do have to kind of wade into the films on the list, especially if your preferred movie watching experience isn't kind of European art house cinema. And I say that because more than half the films out of the 45, I think 26 out of the 45 are European productions in European languages, not in English. Yeah. So, heavily weighted towards Italian movies, but lots of other things as well. There's 2 films by Ingmar Bergman. There's 2 films by Andrei Tarkovsky. There's 2 films by Carl Theodor Dreyer, 2 films by Roberto Rossellini, 2 films by Federico Fellini. It goes on from there. And yeah, let me back up and say something about what the list is. As you said, it came out in 1995. It marked the 100th anniversary of the first public exhibition of a motion picture. And it came out without a lot of fanfare. It came out during the time of Pope St. John Paul II. We know that he was a great theater man and poetry man. He was steeped in European culture, philosophy, languages. He was not apparently a great cinema lover, at least in an exchange of messages that I had with John Paul II's English language biographer, George Weigel. He told me he didn't really know much about John Paul II's movie watching, but nonetheless, during his pontificate, it marked the 100th anniversary, and so the Pontifical Commission for Social Communications published a list along with the Vatican Film Library and various people who were involved in this. And yeah, Zach, you're showing it on your screen now, telling us where the list came from. But basically, these cinephiles who were connected to the Vatican came up with a list of 45 films divided into 3 categories: religion, values, and art, as you said before. And that's significant for a number of reasons. One, the most important thing to point out is, up to this point, the church, the Roman Catholic Church, had I guess we could say, kind of a complicated relationship with the motion picture. Early on in the 1930s, Pope Pius XI was very skeptical about cinema. I mean, he really worried about the effect that it would have on people who flocked to the theaters. And lots of people did back in those days. In 1930, in the United States, 60% of Americans went to the movies once a week. So, which is
60% in the 1930s, 60% of America went to the movies once a week.
Once a week, yeah. It was far and away the most popular form of entertainment. There was no close second. Nothing anywhere near that close. Everybody went to the movies all the time. It was just where you went. And they always had movies going. You could come in, you could watch 1, you could watch 2, you could watch 3. If you've ever seen old movies like the movie Cinema Paradiso, the Italian movie, or there are other examples of this, you see like cinema culture in pre-World War II or World War II era in Europe too, where it just becomes the place where people kind of hang out and talk and stuff, even while the movies are going. So anyway, it was extremely popular. Pius XI worried about this a little bit. He equated it to kind of bread and circuses, thought that it probably did more harm than good. And he might've been right about that. Mm-hmm. However, by the 1950s, it was very clear that cinema had the potential to be not very edifying and just a diversion, but it also had clearly ascended the ranks of the art world and could at that point be considered on par with the greatest works of painting, sculpture, literature, whatever it may be. And that gave rise, through the 50s into the 60s to the auteur movement. And that movement is really what's captured in large part in the Vatican film list. The idea that there's a kind of master artist who uses the medium of cinema to tell a story and to show the world certain things. Anyway, so as things developed, there was this thing called the Legion of Decency in the United States that the Vatican officially, had people view movies and then give them ratings. And if they received a C rating, a condemned rating, that was considered officially not to be watched by Catholics. And there were 144, something like that, 140 movies over a span of about 50 years that were on the condemned list. One of those movies, incidentally, was the movie 8½, which made its way onto the Vatican film list, which is a really interesting thing. And to me, underlines the sort of where the Vatican had come by 1995 in terms of thinking about cinema as an art form. And this is the genius also of dividing the list up into the three different categories of religion, values, and art, because it's saying, look, not every movie, just like not every painting, not every piece of sculpture, not every poem is striving to do the same thing. Not every movie is meant to be sort of shown to the old ladies at church, just like not every song is meant to be used as a hymn in the context of worship, right? So it's really genius because there are things on the list that are really difficult, not only difficult intellectually that require a lot of brain power and may not ever make full sense, but there are a couple of movies on the list that feature nudity. There are a number of them that feature violence, not gruesome, not, pornographic, but something that, that might have been a problem to some people and may still be an issue. I mean, Schindler's List is on the list, for example. That's the latest film to be made that made its way onto the list. It came out in 1993, 2 years before the Vatican film list. And it features both violence and nudity and possibly the most sort of difficult content of any of the films on the entire list. So anyway, it's a mixed bag. It is full of absolute masterpieces and also a few head scratchers. There are a few things on there that it's not entirely clear how or why they ended up on there, but they are. It includes things like all those European directors, like I mentioned before, but it also includes things like The Wizard of Oz, It's a Wonderful Life, Fantasia. It includes things like Stagecoach. It includes a 5-hour silent film about Napoleon. It has, just all kinds of stuff. You're on quite a journey, I would say, Zach, to kind of make your way through all of them.
Yeah, well, I mean, I may have said all of them. That I don't know how committed I am to all of them. As I said, we started 8½, and I thought, I don't think I'm quite ready for this one. I am not super interested in watching the 5-hour film on Napoleon. Is that a silent film as well? I think it is, right?
It is a silent film, and I have not seen that one. Poor Father Michael.
A 5-hour silent film on Napoleon. That was that David who took that one?
No, Father Michael had that one. But wow. There are other silent films on the list, and if you haven't ever seen a silent film, I would say the greatest silent film ever made is on the list, and it's called The Passion of Joan of Arc.
I thought you were going to say that. Yeah, I've seen that one. It's fantastic.
It is. I mean, it's absolutely mesmerizing. And
this is one of the two Carl Theodor Dreyer ones that are on the list, right?
Indeed. And so that's an early Carl Theodor Dreyer from 1928, early-ish, I guess you could say. And then one of his late films, Ordette, which is a spoken film from 1955, is also on the list. I got to write about both of those movies, by the way. I love them both.
I've not seen Ordette. you've told me about it, and I want to see it, but have not yet. We'll get there on our watch. You know, I think I tried to find this on streaming, and it's not widely available. I think it might be on Criterion, but I don't have a membership, so our library didn't have it. So we've had a hard time tracking this one down. Might have to just buy it or subscribe to Criterion for a brief time.
Some of them are very difficult to find still. Most of them aren't, as long as you're willing to pay a rental fee or something like that. But back when the list came out in 1995, there weren't that many places, especially in the United States, where you could just, there was maybe, if you lived in a college town, there might be a kind of coffee shop / art house movie rental place that might have it. Or maybe if you had a really great library, they might have some of those. But not all of those were easy to get. And so in a sense, like the blessing 30 years later is you can find them. You can find almost all of them now.
Yeah, I mean, 95 was even before the founding of the original iteration of Netflix, you know, where you got the DVDs in the mail.
Yeah,
so,
long before. Yeah. And I mean, it was just your local video shop and, you know, take the tape home for the night or something like that. And that was really when I was coming of age and becoming a cinephile. And I myself did that sort of thing in the mid to late 90s. I would go and seek out foreign movies. And then when I got to college, I watched a lot of foreign movies and a lot of art house movies. And so I had seen some of the movies on the list way back then, but it wasn't very normal to just see a Fellini movie on a shelf at your local store, or, you know, a Carl Theodor Dreyer film or a Tarkovsky film.
Well, and the thing you did in the 90s was you'd go to Blockbuster and you would just walk the shelves and see what stuck out to you. And it was mostly the popular ones that were there. So
yeah, there's still a number of movies in my head that I haven't actually seen, but I picture the boxes so vividly because of like picking them up time and time again on my Friday evening strolls through the aisles at Blockbuster Video.
Yeah, totally. I missed that. Sort of that cultural liturgy of the Friday night Blockbuster visits.
Yep.
It's a good time, a simpler time. Maybe let's talk through one or two of these, Andrew. Probably ones that I've seen so far. We just finished Au revoir les enfants.
Au revoir les enfants.
I pronounced that remotely correctly. Goodbye Children is the English translation of that title. Talk to me about this film. I think you wrote the commentary on this. I thought it was very powerful. So your commentary was good. The film was powerful. The film also, it had me sort of wanting the action to move along a little bit more, and I kept waiting for a dramatic climax that kind of sort of came at the end. But I think the climax is really the very end, which I won't totally spoil for those who haven't seen it. But tell us about this film and what it is.
I saw Au revoir les enfants for the first time when I was taking French in high school, and it always stuck with me. So I was really delighted that I was delegated this film to watch again closely and to write about for Popcorn with the Pope. It came out in 1987. It's directed by Louis Malle, Malle, Louis Malle. He was a French director who was kind of loosely connected to the New Wave, the French New Wave, which included the likes of Jean-Luc Godard and François Truffaut and Eric Rohmer and others. None of those directors, by the way, who are considered some of the masters, none of their films are on the list. But Louis Malle is on the list. This was long after really he wasn't really associated with that anymore. He came to America for a while. He made some movies in the States. He went back to France in the late 80s, shortly before his death. And he made this movie that's semi-autobiographical, that is about a boy who comes from kind of a privileged family in France, who's away at a Carmelite boarding school during the German occupation of France during World War II. And the school is run by this very kindly Carmelite priest who very carefully and secretively protects some Jews, including one Jewish boy who comes to the school, and they try to get him to sort of blend in. They make up an identity for him. And he's the action kind of goes from there. There's the main character, whose name I'm now blanking on, but there's the one boy who's sort of the main character, and then he sort of is trying to make sense of this new boy and whether they're supposed to be friends or not friends. So on the one hand, it's just a kind of coming of age story about a new kid who shows up at school, right? Like that could be any time or any place, but it's also in the context of, if they find out that this kid is Jewish, not only will that kid be sent to a concentration camp, but probably the priest and anybody else who's been involved in hiding him is done for. It's a very humane movie. I mean, it's a really beautiful movie, in my opinion, about childhood and about navigating the difficulties of life. I mean, can you even imagine, Zach? I mean, we live in such a, we live in, I mean, I hesitate to use this term, but such a privileged existence. Like, we haven't grown up in a war zone. We haven't lived in an occupied country. Maybe some of our listeners have, and they know something about that. But these boys in this movie are living in these really, really horrible conditions and uncertain times, right? And so the movie's really interesting because, well, I'll say this, and maybe you have other comments to make, but I like the movie from a kind of purely Catholic perspective. I think anybody could watch it and love it. I mean, Louis Malle wasn't really a super engaged practicing Catholic by this time when he's making the movie, but he really wanted to go out of his way to depict the church in a good light because his experience of the church at this time in his life was positive, because he was going to this boarding school with this priest who believed that it was the Christian duty to stand up for and indeed sort of help protect the Jewish people who are being persecuted by the Nazis. So the church comes off in a very positive light in this movie. I think the church comes across as heroic, and the priest who runs the school in particular, and the real priest that the film, the character in the film is based on, was remembered as a part of the official Holocaust memorial in Jerusalem, right?
Yad
Vashem. Yeah. So it's based on a true story, and it's just a really beautiful movie.
Yeah. All of that resonates with me, having just seen this a couple nights ago. I think as far as the sort of difficulty of their existence there, what struck me was that the entire movie is filmed in winter. And so there is never a colorful spring or summer scene. It's all very sort of dreary, and not just dreary, but cold.
Really
it's
cold.
An exceptionally cold winter for mainland Europe. I don't know if that is accurate. The film depicts 1940. I don't know if 1940 was exceptionally cold, but it's, in the film, it's exceptionally cold. I mean, there's one little stove in the boys' classroom, but even so, they're all wearing coats and gloves just to sit there and do their studies. So it's just very cold throughout. Mm-hmm. And that coldness is also reflected in the tone, the cinematographic tone of the film. I agree with you that the director clearly wanted to portray the heroic virtue of the Carmelite priest, the head of the school, the father who runs it. I would say that I think the Catholic Church, while it comes off very well, it's not uniformly well. There's a little aside comment that the priest makes to the main character, one of the main character boys, in a confession, or after a sacramental confession, after the sacrament is concluded. He maybe sort of makes a comment about how droll the job of a priest is, or something like that. Mm-hmm. And yet, he persists in the heroic virtue that his priesthood requires of him. I think that was an interesting commentary on the church. There's another scene where the head of the school gives a homily where he excoriates the rich and the collaborators with the Nazi regime, and urges them to do their Christian duty. So yeah, I thought it was a very interesting film. I think the other thing, my wife pointed this out, and once she said it, I couldn't unsee it, but it's interesting that the film sort of vacillates between showing these children as children, experiencing the things that children do, and they get in little fights, and there are sort of bully things in the schoolyard, and they laugh uproariously at the antics of Charlie Chaplin in a movie that they get to see. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, they're also sort of going through this experience, which is really one that no one should ever go through, but especially not children. So they get sort of matured through this process of suffering in the film. The main Jewish character, whose French name is Jean Bonnet, but I think his Jewish last name is Kippelstein.
Yeah, right.
He doesn't have family. He's maybe an orphan. He doesn't know where his parents are, or if his parents are alive. Hasn't seen them in a long time. So he obviously has had to do a lot of growing up on his own. And there are quite a few scenes that have this sort of awkward juxtaposition. Here are the boys doing very adult things, or even opening up the pages of Arabian Nights to a very sort of steamy, sensual scene. And then in the next scene, they're, like I said, laughing at a Charlie Chaplin bit, And I thought that was an interesting portrayal of how the circumstances shaped the children and mature them probably certainly faster than they should have matured, but also just a commentary on our human and psychological development.
Yeah, and for good and for ill, right?
Right.
So Julien has this sort of coming of age. Yeah, I mean he wants to come across to the world that he's more, he's wise beyond his years, that he's very mature, whatever. But he has this like persistent problem of wetting the bed,
Right. Yes, I forgot about
so
that.
there's that. There's his brother, whose name I'm now blanking on, but there's his brother who is very very idealistic, and
Yep.
you can imagine that he might be the sort of man who, becomes a real leader in the French Fifth
Resistance,
Republic,
yeah.
or he's
Yeah.
like going to be a resistance guy and then sort
Yeah.
of go on to lead the new France once the Nazis are gone, right? Contrast those guys with this character in the movie called Joseph, who's this sad character he's got a disability, and the boys at the school make fun of him, and they shouldn't. They're privileged boys, and he's this poor boy who works in the kitchen. But he, because he uses his own hurt, his own immaturity to do some really awful things. And so, you get this whole kind of range of coming of age stuff that's going on in the movie. And then you also see what's happening in the lives of the adults too. I think it's a really terrific movie, really good World War II movie and coming of age movie.
The other thing I'll add is that I think it's Francois. I'm looking at your commentary. It's Francois, who is, I think, Julien's older brother.
Yeah, that sounds right.
So Francois at one point is in the schoolyard talking with his friends about Thomas Aquinas's accounts for God.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's another juxtaposition, right? Like they're in the schoolyard. It's recess. A bunch of the boys are running around on stilts, having little chicken fights. And then here's Francois talking with his peers about Thomas Aquinas's arguments for God. What's interesting is you just contrasted Francois and Joseph. Joseph walks with a limp because he has some sort of disability from that. The interesting thing to me is that Thomas Aquinas uses exactly this illustration to talk about sin that warps us, right?
Mm-hmm.
And having a defect of your leg so that you walk with a limp. And so here's here's Joseph literally walking with a limp, and he ends up being sort of the villain of the film, or maybe not the villain, although there's certain some villainous sides to what he does, but really a pathetic character, almost a Judas, right, in the way that he betrays them because of his disordered nature and his willingness to acquiesce to that disordered nature.
Yeah,
so
that's
right.
Quite
an interesting illustration there.
Yeah.
Let's talk about one more before we go into this AI article that you wrote. Babette's Feast. I had not seen this film until we were going through the book, and it was on the Vatican Film List, and I thought I've got to see this. My wife had seen it, so she was at least somewhat familiar. I think it had been well over a decade since she had, so it was nice for her to go through it again. But tell me about Babette's Feast and what this movie represents.
Here's my take on Babette's Feast with regard to this book that we've written, Popcorn with the Pope. People often ask me, if you have to start somewhere with the list, where do you start? And I always say Babette's Feast. I think Babette's Feast is the film which really embodies the spirit of the list best. It is a beautifully made film. It has deep religious, Christian, Catholic themes in it, but it is not overtly a Christian or Catholic movie. It's not beating you over the head with anything. And in fact, I mean, it's based on a story by a Danish man, a Protestant, made by Protestants. And the main characters in the movie, aside from Babette, are Protestants. And they're very kind of dour, they're Lutherans, I think. They have this very, and actually...
They seem to be almost a... I don't want to say a pseudo-Christian cult, but they're very invested in their leader, and they've built a little tiny commune. So I think they sort of are Lutheran in heritage, but they seem to have sort of branched off into something a little bit even different from that.
Yeah, you see this in the movie Ordette as well, which is also a Danish movie, and it features two different families, two different Lutheran families. One of them are kind of this sort of high-minded liberal Lutheran family, and the other one belonged to this something more like almost like a kind of Puritan cult. And with the leader very much kind of at the center. That's what you see in Babette's Feast, for sure. You see that there's this old Lutheran minister who has this kind of circle in the town that they all kind of come and sit around his table, and they listen to him, and they sing together, and they have this very, very austere life that they lead all together. They die, and the two sisters are left. They're celibate. They're spinsters. They live together and they continue the work of their late father. They lead prayer meetings and they sing and they tend to the needs of each other in their community. It's kind of a beautiful thing. But then all of a sudden Babette arrives, who's a French woman, and you don't know much about her, but you realize that she has just arrived in this kind of middle of nowhere place in Denmark, needing a place to stay. She has been recommended by a famous opera singer who is a sort of a friend of the town, a friend of this Danish town, and once stayed there, and in fact once tried to woo one of the two religious sisters to run away with him and be his wife, because she has this angelic voice. So anyway, what's his name? Achille Pepin, I think is his name.
Yes, that's right.
And so Achille has recommended that Babette run away to this town, and you find out later it has to do with some events having to do with the Paris Commune and the events of 1870 in Paris. So she just arrives in this town and she becomes the cook and the kind of caretaker of these two ladies. I don't need to summarize the whole plot, but basically I can give away just this one part. She comes into some money and she decides to use her money to throw a lavish dinner for the people of this town who are used to nothing but basically kind of gruel and, very
like salted fish. Yeah.
Salted fish, very simple food. And it the whole thing it doesn't take much explaining to just get right from the start is really kind of a Eucharistic metaphor. I mean, it's meant to sort of be all about the abundance of God, the abundant grace of God, and the kind of self-offering of this woman whose sort of gift, her artistry, is to create this food and this experience for these people who are kind of resistant to receiving it.
Yeah, I mean, we learned that she was a very well-trained chef at one of Paris's finest restaurants and all of this, and so she finally gets a chance to sort of ply her craft to give this gift to people. She spends all her money doing it. I mean, it really is a beautiful metaphor of total self-giving.
Yeah.
And self-sacrifice. I found it to be a fascinating film. I loved it. I couldn't think of a single thing I didn't like about it. I would say after I watched it, it immediately shot up into the ranks of some of my favorite films that I've seen. I really, really enjoyed it.
Me too. Our children have seen it. They love it as well. And anybody can watch it. There are a couple of scenes that are just astonishing in their beauty. There's a scene where the Swedish general, who's this sort of like the only person around the table who kind of knows what he's experiencing because he's seen it before, and he stands up and gives this speech that your jaw drops. Just the way that he expresses just what he gets what the whole experience is about, and we through his explanation really get it too. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, love that film. All right, so that's where you recommend people start. So people watch Babette's Feast and they're going through the Vatican film list. What else would you recommend as a number 2, maybe a number 3 option to watch?
Well, there's so many good choices on there. I mentioned Ordette before. Ordette is a much more difficult movie to watch than Babette's Feast, but it is equally moving and edifying. I mean, it is really just one of those things when the credits roll, you just have to sit there for a minute and kind of just say a prayer of thanksgiving. It's so beautiful and so powerful. So I recommend that one. But like I said, it's a little bit more difficult to get into than Babette's Feast, but a great, great movie. Another one that I recommend is The Flowers of St. Francis by Roberto Rossellini. That one is another one that's really easy to watch. It's funny. It's charming. It tells the story not only of St. Francis, but of now my mind is blanking. The other kind of famous friar that is, I'll have to open my book and find it out. I'm totally blanking. But anyway, there's another great character, hilarious character, who's kind of a bit of a holy fool who's among St. Francis's band, and it's just a kind of beautiful movie about serving God and just sort of being open to His will. So
sounds good.
Yeah,
maybe we'll have to watch that one next. We've not made our way to that one yet. We're not going sequentially. We're not going. We're sort of picking and choosing as we go, and we've tried to start with the ones that are more accessible. So we'll have to go check that one out.
The character's name is Ginepero, by the way, Brother Ginepero. It just popped into my head. He's a hilarious character, and it's a series of vignettes as well. So you could even watch it over It's not a very long movie, but it's easy to watch because it's broken up into these individual vignettes. Some of them are very moving. Some of them are just laugh out loud funny. It's a really wonderful movie from one of the great masters, Roberto Rossellini, who he was not a practicing Catholic when he made the movie, though of course he was very much a cultural Catholic.
Yeah.
But he wanted to make a movie after World War II that offered to his people, the people of Italy, a kind of palate cleanser from their experience of fascism. And so he settled on St. Francis as kind of the figure that they needed to meditate upon. And that's why he made that movie. Pope John the 23rd loved it. He loved that movie. He saw the premiere of it actually before he was Pope, when he was the nuncio to Paris. And he knew Rossellini a little bit. And he said to him something like, "My dear boy, you don't know what you've done." He said something like that when he made the movie. So it's a great one.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll definitely watch that one next. That sounds great.
Yeah.
Well, now that we've laid out what cinema can be, let's talk about what cinema is trying to be, or what some people are trying to make cinema become.
Mm-hmm.
You have this fantastic article in Catholic World Report where you are a columnist, and the title is "Why Catholics Can and Should Resist AI." If you're watching on YouTube here, I'm going to share my screen again, and we can kind of go through a few of the highlights here. And then we'll talk about it. So rather than asking you to summarize, Andrew, I will try to summarize here as we go, and then you can let me know what I missed, and I've got a few questions for you based on this. So you open up by saying that the famous film animator, Hayao Miyazaki, in 2016 was shown a computer-generated sequence of animation, and he was horrified and basically said, "This is an insult to life itself." I think the exact words. Yeah, here we go. I strongly feel this is an insult to life itself. And then you say, of course, I mean, this is 2016. Back then, I think we've all seen the sort of Will Smith animated AI generated video from a year ago. It was horrible. He's sort of eating spaghetti. It's pixelated. Has jittery movements. Now we have much more smooth technology. ChatGPT came out with a better video generator a bit ago. There's another startup called Runway that is doing this really well. Also, now it's getting to be indistinguishable from real life, especially when we're talking about landscape animation. A little bit less so when we talk about human beings, but it's getting very good. And so we're tempted to say, oh, I mean, yeah, the old stuff, that was pretty horrible. It was like very low quality animation. Of course, there was Uncanny Valley. It's so much better now, and that's great. But then you argue that actually you think that as AI gets better, it actually threatens to, or actually does, sideline human beings even more. And the insult to life, this is your language now, the insult to life itself grows into a zombie video game writ large.
Yeah.
And then you go into sort of some of the background on this, the SAG-AFTRA writers' strike, in which many Hollywood professionals, writers, and actors went on strike because they were concerned about Hollywood studios' lack of guarantees that they would not rely on AI to replicate the likenesses of the actors or to replicate the talents of the writers. They wanted to make sure that their jobs were safe, which I think is a very reasonable human impulse. And then, of course, that was eventually resolved, which is why we have Hollywood movies again. But it's resolved for now. There's no guarantee that in the future we won't have this. You also talk about music and how we're seeing music get worse and worse because, you converge upon a single point of commonality. There ends up being less creativity because every generative AI model actually just takes what has come before it and sort of integrates or synthesizes those things rather than developing something new or coming up with a new form of art. It's not art. It's really just generative synthesis in a rather incoherent way. So we're seeing this suffer in music as well. And then you talk about some of the things that the Catholic Church, namely Pope Francis, has said recently about using technology and how technology threatens to replace people, and technology can threaten to diminish people's dignity, and how we need to be careful about crafting rules around AI and technological development more generally, et cetera. And so I think you go on to say that sort of there's some merit to these approaches, et cetera, but ultimately, this is going to be an issue of the soul, and this problem will not be stopped by policy. This problem will be stopped by people, individual communities, families, doing the hard work of cultivating the soul. I don't know how well I've summarized that. Hopefully that's at least enough for a launching point. But what else did I miss in my summary of your article here? I will drop a link as well to people who want to read it, and I encourage you to read it. Maybe pause this and go read the article and then come back and listen.
Well, no, thank you. I think that was a good summary, and I'm delighted to hear that you like the article, because I know, maybe you and I have slightly different perspectives on some of the AI questions. I don't know, but for me, I'm just such a cultural. I'm so focused on culture and on art as sort of the expression of the soul. So for me, AI is very troubling with regard to those questions. And I wanted to just point out in the article that it's not just kind of Luddite religious types that are concerned about these questions. I mean, artists themselves, as you pointed out, I mean, the use of AI was very much a focal point of the Writers and Directors Guild strike of 2023, and then also the SAG-AFTRA strike. Now, I do want to point out briefly that it appears the writers got something of a better deal than the actors in the end when the strikes were resolved. They got certain assurances about like how many human beings actually have to be in writers' rooms and things like that when they're creating content. Now, I mean, I like the kind of art, I like the kind of films that really aren't going to be made in this world anyway. So for me, it's kind of moot. But the thing is, I still think it's bad for the culture that our kind of highest priority film artifacts are going to be created this way. So anyway, the writers got their deal. The actors' deal, though, is more troubling. They got certain assurances that they would have to be, their consent would be required if they were going to be, if their likeness would be used, and especially in these deals where like their likeness could be used basically in perpetuity. So you could watch a Brad Pitt movie 100 years from now, and because that's what like AI will be able to do, that's what like the technology will be able to do. But it's still going to happen. I mean, which is kind of the problem, And so like right now, actors show up for their roles, including background actors or extras, and they get scanned. And now they have to consent to do it. But if they don't want to do it, they don't get the job, And I don't know, that to me is just very inhumane. And it's not about the craft of acting, which we do in front of cameras, but I mean, it's still a human endeavor. Similar things with music.
So when you say that they get scanned, like they're getting like a facial body scan so that the computer can replicate, that's crazy.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much standard practice on film sets now, like at least with certain production companies that, and actually one of the so-called victories, if you read the like fact sheet that the Screen Actors Guild put out after the strike was resolved, I mean, one of the kind of victories that they're pointing to, which to me doesn't seem like a huge victory, is just that now they have to be told in advance that it is a requirement of the role that they be scanned. And I mean, they can refuse it, but again, like they just won't work if that's the case. Now, again, not every filmmaker is going to be doing this. Not every production company is going to be doing this, but you can be sure that the big studios probably are going to be doing this.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And certainly with regard to things like background talent, extras, we call them. I mean, why would production companies keep paying human beings when they can just basically develop a palette of background talent? I mean, and this has already happened to some degree, but I mean, it just seems like this is going to happen more and more in the future. So, maybe this is not a tree worth barking up, but it is a little bit concerning to me. And the same thing with the music industry. And now that's an industry that's becoming less and less human. It's already becoming less and less human. I mean, the auto-tune revolution.
For a long time, that's been happening.
Yeah, I mean, for the auto-tune revolution, that was huge. I mean, just even the way that like an album is made, if you're listening to music, like there are so many different tracks that are now, like it used to be that you would make an album and maybe you'd have like, in the old days, like 8 tracks or 16 tracks or whatever. So you would have like these different tracks that you would have to mix together. Now you can have infinite number of tracks, right? Like, I mean, many, many, many tracks, right? And you can put them all together. You can like, everything is done to a click track. So everything is basically just sort of done to a metronome. And you can therefore then just like put this on top of that and splice this and this and that and change the pitches with the auto-tune. So it's basically just, if you like it, it's fine, but it's not really the same thing as music per se. And this even happens in live performances now. I mean, I know a lot of people enjoy Taylor Swift's music and she does what she does, but even Taylor Swift basically performs to backing tracks when she's playing live. So she's really singing into the microphone, but you could turn off her microphone and you would still, if you were out in the crowd, basically still hear everything that's playing through the speakers because it's backing tracks. Same with like Dua Lipa and like, whoever else is big now. So, I mean, AI, is it that big a leap then from the kind of artificiality that we already have in music? Well, maybe not, but it does represent, I think, a step beyond, especially when you have the streaming services themselves actually creating AI songs, attributing them to human beings. They just make up a name and then they put them on playlists. So you don't actually even know if you're listening to a human being or not, which is, I don't know, a problem to me.
That's definitely a problem. I think this tree is definitely worth barking up, not only in its particulars, namely, hey, the entertainment industry needs to proceed with caution here and make sure that they were preserving the dignity of its artists, but also by extension, its viewers or listeners. I think that tree is worth barking up, but also in its generalities. This is a problem that applies to almost all domains. Not the sort of hard manufacturing, industrial production domains and the trades, but all sort of white collar services, financial, back office administrative stuff. All those domains threaten to be totally upended by AI. In the same way, there's this company called Lattice that does a lot of sort of performance review, human capital, human relations management stuff. And they recently announced that they just rolled out the world's, let me see if I can find this announcement. They just rolled out the world's first digital employee performance feedback system.
Oh my goodness.
And when I read this, I was thinking, oh wait, that's interesting. But you're just saying it's a digital platform for employee management. But no, that's not what they said. They said it's for digital workers. And I was thinking, okay, they're like remote workers? No, digital workers meaning bots.
Bots, yeah.
So you can now, provide feedback to your bots. This is okay. I found the article, or one of the articles. This is from The Verge. The headline: This HR company tried to treat AI bots like people. It didn't go over well. After backlash, mercifully, Lattice canceled a feature that would let organizations make employee records for AI workers. So there was a backlash because people have common sense. It's in shorter and shorter supply these days, but some people do still have this. So yeah, this blog post initially, this is what I saw, I think on LinkedIn. Today, Lattice makes history and leads the way in responsible employment of AI. Okay, so they have this innovation, blah, 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 blah. 6 months ago, this is so great. We're leading our way into the future. Update July 12th. Okay. Yeah, we're gonna not do this. Okay. So yeah, very predictable backlash, et cetera. But they wanted to make it easier for you to employ AI bots. Why was this backlash happen? I mean, the drivers are primarily economic rather than being concerned about human dignity, although there's some of the latter. But people are thinking like, I don't want my job replaced. You're making it easier for my company to replace my job and my livelihood to provide for my family.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And as you said, I do argue ultimately that the solution to all of this is it's going to be very difficult to pursue solutions to this kind of legislatively and or judicially. I don't know. And I'm kind of an adherent to the scholar Michael Hanby on questions like this. I mean, he just really sort of says that the power that technology has unleashed is really impossible even for a state to rein in. It's kind of too late. However, in the short term, I think it's perfectly reasonable, and this is actually something Pope Francis has been advocating for. It's perfectly reasonable to say, at least let's try to be careful about workers' rights and copyrights, things like that, like stuff that we can manage at least a little bit for a while. Like we can't just throw people out on the street because computers can do their jobs. We can't. We don't want that. That's bad. Copyrights. I mean, this is one of the issues that's the major music producers, the ones that are left, Sony, Universal, Warner, they're suing some of these AI companies because these companies are just taking catalogs of music and feeding them into their machines.
Yeah, they're training their models on it.
Yeah, which, I mean, it's a gray area. Are they allowed to do that or are they not? I mean, this is what the courts are going to have to decide. But basically they're taking real human beings' art and they're feeding it into machines so that we can then eventually say to the machine, hey, write me a song that sounds like Bruce Springsteen. And then we'll listen to that. So, I mean, in the short term, maybe.
This is not limited to the entertainment space because my understanding is, at least the allegation is, and I don't think ChatGPT has refuted this or outright denied it, but people think that ChatGPT basically fed all of YouTube to its model to train it, right? And so, Space Salvi stuff that you do, and it's out on YouTube, our podcasts that are on YouTube, right? we just fed that to the machine,
Yeah.
right? So now ChatGPT is going to be citing things that maybe you're the first person who ever uttered something on a Space Salvi podcast or on What a Week, and now ChatGPT is going to be able to take that and run with it and give that to people to include in their presentations and whatnot, and like your intellectual property is now gone.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm somewhat pessimistic about all of this, just from, like I say, my concern is culture. I mean, of course, like in my brain, because I've seen a lot of sci-fi movies and dystopian movies, there's part of me that thinks it's all going to be like Terminator 2 and it's going to wake up and kill us one day. But I mean, whatever. In my kind of more rational brain, it just makes me sad for our culture. Like I want humanity. I want things that make us more human, not less human. And I conclude my article, and we can talk about this however you like, but I mean, I conclude my article by saying, I mean, the Catholic Church at the very least ought to be using a differentiation from AI as an evangelism tool, essentially. Like, you hear people say we need to use AI as an evangelism tool. I say, no, let's use anti-AI as an evangelism tool. Why? Because it's literally impossible to be a Catholic artificially or virtually. There, we believe until the Lord returns, a man will have to stand at the altar with a wafer in his hands and with a chalice full of wine and water. He will have to sit in a confessional, and we will have to use our tongues in our human bodies to confess our sins, etc. Right? We'll have to bring our babies to the fonts full of water and chrismate them with oil and so on. So our reality that we inhabit as Catholics is real. It's the real. And, I just have to expect people are going to long for that more and more, and we have to be ready to receive them.
Yeah, no, I think you'll find no argument from me on that point. My last or two podcasts ago, I had a conversation with my friend Alex Focus. He was finishing his PhD at Oxford on AI and the philosophical implications therein. And he and I talked about this a good bit, that, try as it might, AI will never replace the fully real. It can make digital replicas of these things, but it cannot replace the real. And our faith is actually grounded in the incarnation. So the sacraments are real. The sacraments are not ethereal. Mm-hmm. The sacraments are real, and they will always be real, as you said, until Christ returns. So yeah, our faith is not one that can be digitally replicated. Mm-hmm. It can be advanced through digital means, but the digital means are never a replacement for the faith itself. I think I share your pessimism in general. I don't share your pessimism about the sort of apocalyptic, Skynet, Terminator advancement of AI. I don't think that's going to happen. Mm-hmm. I do think that there's certainly a growing risk of, and Alex and I talked about this on the podcast too, a growing risk of narrow AI bringing catastrophe on the world. I think that could very well happen. But I think the most likely outcome of AI is cultural devastation. Mm-hmm. I think that's where we're headed.
That's right.
Cultural and, I would say, economic devastation. So I think those two pillars of a healthy society will be absolutely decimated by the advancement of AI, unless we wake up and realize, okay, just because we can does not necessarily mean we should.
Yeah.
Right. But this technocratic imperative drives so much of what we do, especially around AI, that I don't know we have the self-control to do that.
Yeah, I think that's right. And like I say, yeah, the genie's already out of the bottle, the toothpaste out of the tube, whatever it is. I sometimes think about the movie Minority Report, the Steven Spielberg movie, where it's not so much about AI, it's sort of about these psychic like seers who have this like gift where they can see crime before it is going to happen. And so they have this whole pre-crime division that Tom Cruise heads in the movie, and it basically,
it's a pretty fun movie.
It's a great movie. I love it. It's terrific. It's based on a Philip K. Dick short story. It came out in 2002 when we were sort of, heightened to the, concern post 9/11 about living
the DHS,
living in a surveillance state or whatever. Yep. We've all forgotten that. I haven't, but a lot of people have. But anyway,
I mean, we've forgotten about it because we're in it now, so we just sort of become.
We don't care. We want our doorbells to record strangers walking by with their dogs now, so we don't care.
It's necessary,
I guess, yeah. But one of the things that happens in that movie, right, is there's a kind of near catastrophe and kind of near a miscarriage of justice that becomes such a scandal ultimately that then, I don't want to give the movie away, but then it sort of opens the door to undoing what seemed like kind of an inevitability of a certain piece of technology. And maybe something like that is possible still with some of this AI stuff that we're doing, because I'm with you. I mean, we're losing our humanity because of it. Our culture is just being flattened out. And indeed, I mean, what will be left will be our marveling at what AI does for us. I mean, which to me is no life at all, right? I mean, like we'll go to a movie and we'll say, wow, that scene was so realistic, or like we'll sort of compliment the computers for giving us things that simulate real experience. And I want something more.
I made this point on Twitter the other day that Mark Zuckerberg was in an interview, was answering questions about his vision for AI, and the interviewer, whose name I do not know, so I apologize, but it was a good question. She basically said, like, so you just want a bunch of AI gods? Because he was talking about sort of personalized AI that can do all the things that we can do. And so she said, you want a bunch of AI gods running around. And he said, well, no, I don't really, no, not really gods. They'll just be, facsimiles, replicas of ourselves. It's digital. So like I could just wake up and spend my day with my family because I send my little digital facsimile off to my day job to do that work, because it's all accomplished by computer anyway. So I can just do that and it can represent me there and all that. And I can get the daily download, et cetera.
Yeah.
But that's such a dehumanizing way to work and way to view the world. And I think that the reporter was onto something, because that is a god. You're creating a god of yourself. So this is the ultimate sort of the ultimate self-adulation that ultimately leads to self-immolation. We lose our own identity when we do that. It's just horrible. But we've set up people like Mark Zuckerberg as our kind of philosopher kings in this techno age, simply because they're really good coders who got lucky in the .com boom, and now we think like, oh yeah, well you're the one that we should have lead us into the next age of existence. This is a good idea.
Yeah, they're sort of the shaman of a new technocratic religion.
Right.
Yeah, and our Catholic faith is something else. It has to be.
Yeah. Well, we're just about out of time, so we can end on that note. But I will drop the link to Andrew's article in the show notes, as I mentioned. Andrew, thanks for writing that. Thanks for all your great work. Speaking of your great work, where can people find more of what you do?
Well, you can find some of what I'm doing with my colleague Robert Mixa over at spacesalviinstitute.com. The Space Salvi Institute is a project we're working on. We have a podcast, we have articles up on our website, and more to come pretty soon. You can check out all my articles that I've written at Catholic World Report over at Catholic World Report. And be sure to buy a copy of Popcorn with the Pope, a guide to the Vatican film list, which is available from Word on Fire, or you can buy it anywhere you get your books. It's available everywhere. Beautiful. Well, Andrew, thanks so much for joining me. It was a great discussion. Look forward to having you on again soon. To my listeners, send me a note with any feedback you have, Zac, Z-A-C, @creedalpodcast.com. And until next time, God bless you.